I first met Pam during my freshman year of college when she took the seat next to me on the first day of my managerial economics class. Our initial encounters were far from friendly. As she settled into the seat beside me, I couldn't help but glance her way. That brief look quickly turned into a longer, more appraising stare. Pam had ash blonde hair, but what really caught my attention were her long legs extending from under her short skirt and the 4-inch heels she was wearing. I've always had a thing for high heels, and my interest was piqued. "What the fuck are you staring at?" she snapped, her tone laced with irritation. Her abruptness irritated me, so I shot back, "If you're dumb enough to ask that question, you're obviously not smart enough to understand the answer." Before things could escalate, Professor Smythe called the class to order. As soon as it ended, I quickly gathered my things and hurried out, needing to get to my next class on the opposite side of campus in just 10 minutes. Later that day, while I was having lunch at the Student Union cafeteria, my focus was interrupted when someone pulled out a chair and sat across from me. I looked up to see the same slender, ash-blonde woman from earlier. "What did you mean by your clever remark this morning?" she demanded, her tone as sharp as it had been in class. I glanced at my watch before replying, "It's been over 2 hours since I said that, and you still don't get it? Well, I did say you were dumb, didn't I?" Without a word, she reached across the table, grabbed my water glass, and threw its contents in my face. "Bastard!" she spat before storming off. When Thursday rolled around, I spotted her as she entered the classroom and took her seat. I walked in afterward and deliberately knocked over the cup of water she had with her, causing the water to spill down her neck. Predictably, she reacted with a sharp, "What the hell?" I smiled and replied, "Surely you've heard of Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Or maybe you've heard the modern version, what goes around comes around." "Asshole," she growled before getting up to go to the restroom. By the time she returned, class had already started. As she slipped into her seat, Professor Smythe remarked, "Class begins at 9:05, Miss Stewart. Please be seated by then to avoid causing a disruption." Pam shot me a look that could have killed, clearly still fuming and likely plotting her next move. But as soon as class ended, I was out the door and on my way to my next class before she had a chance to confront me again. As I hurried to class, I debated whether to grab lunch in the cafeteria. The chances of running into Miss Stewart were high. She probably expected to see me, or at least hoped to. Did I want another confrontation? A smirk crossed my face as I realized I did. There was a certain satisfaction in getting under Miss Stewart's skin. After grabbing my tray, I scanned the room but didn't see her. That didn't mean much. She could appear at any moment. I chose a table against the wall, sitting with my back to the entrance so she couldn't sneak up on me. Soon after, I was joined, not by Miss Stewart, but by Billy Newbert. I'd known Billy for years. He was my neighbor growing up until his family moved away. We reconnected on the soccer field in 10th grade when my school played his. He was a wide receiver, and I was a middle defender. I didn't realize it was him when I knocked him down during the game, but as I reached out a hand to help him up, he said, "Damn, Rob, that's no way to treat an old friend." After that, we kept in touch. Billy was a better player than I was and earned a full athletic scholarship, while I attended college thanks to a trust fund my grandparents set up when I was born. As Billy sat down, he said, "I heard about Snake throwing water in your face, and I heard you got your revenge today." "Snake? Who's Snake?" I asked. "That's what we called Pam Stewart in high school." "Why'd you call her Snake?" "Because she's like a snake in the grass. If you crossed her, she'd wait patiently until she could strike back. I've seen her bide her time for a whole year before getting even. She acts sweet as sugar until it's time for payback. Just a heads up, buddy. Keep an eye on her." I didn't see Miss Stewart that day and figured I wouldn't see her again until Monday. I was wrong. I wasn't in a fraternity. I didn't have the time. I spent weekends and a couple of evenings each week working at my Uncle Mike's shop or on construction sites with my Uncle Jim. My parents had given me a car for my 16th birthday with the condition that I covered the costs of plates, insurance, maintenance, and gas, which meant I needed to work. Even though I wasn't part of a fraternity, I knew plenty of guys who were, so I got invited to a lot of their parties. One Saturday night, I was at a Pi Kappa Alpha house party when I saw Pam Stewart walk in with a guy I didn't know personally, but I knew of him. He was a quarterback on the soccer team, notorious for having a temper. I could already imagine how things might go if Miss Stewart and I continued our feud, and he decided to back her up. I wasn't afraid of him, but as a guest, I didn't want to get involved in anything that could cause trouble for the fraternity. A fight could lead to the police showing up, which could spell all sorts of trouble with the college administration. I decided to avoid Miss Stewart and her group, even if it meant leaving the party. But my best efforts weren't enough. About 45 minutes after Miss Stewart arrived at the party, I headed to the bathroom. When I came out, I found her standing in the hallway right outside the door. Without warning, she shoved me hard in the chest, causing me to stumble backward. Before I could react, she slipped into the bathroom and locked the door behind her. It was clear she wasn't expecting what I did next. I moved forward, placing my hands on her shoulders, and pushed her gently back against the door. "You clearly haven't learned yet. Every action has a reaction. What goes around comes around." "Get your hands off me," she snapped. "No way. You initiated this, and besides, you don't seem to mind the attention." She tried to push back, but I was ready for it. Despite everything, I couldn't help but notice how determined she looked. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. "Nothing you wouldn't expect," I replied with a smirk. But instead of continuing, I stepped back and let her go. She straightened up, glaring at me, and I added, "You really need to reconsider your approach." With that, I unlocked the door and walked out, deciding it was probably best to leave the party. By Monday's managerial economics class, I was curious about what might happen next. When I took my seat, Miss Stewart was already there, ignoring me completely. But I couldn't help but glance her way occasionally, remembering the weekend. Just as I was settling in, she turned to me and said, "You're not avoiding me this time. I want to know what you meant that first day." Her usual assertive tone didn't bother me as much this time. "Come on. You know exactly what kind of attention you're getting. If you don't want it, maybe try a different approach. But for now, let's drop it, or we'll both be late." Then she added with a smirk, "And as I recall, you didn't seem to mind the attention either." Not wanting to miss an opportunity, I said, "Absolutely, and we can continue this conversation over lunch in the cafeteria, but right now, I need to get to my next class." "Until then," she replied, standing up and walking away. I had to hurry, but I made it to Carlisle Hall just in time. As I headed to the Student Union cafeteria afterward, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd misinterpreted the situation. Was Miss Stewart just being friendly, or was there something more to her invitation? I had to admit I was curious. Miss Stewart was undeniably intriguing, and I hadn't been in a relationship for a while. Thinking about my past still stings. I had been in a committed relationship since 8th grade, and we had already started planning our wedding for after college graduation. I'd even put an engagement ring on her finger. I remember how it sparkled when she told me she needed to cut our date short that night. "I met a guy in one of my classes, and he asked me out tonight." "Let me get this straight. You're canceling our date, your fiancé, to go out with another guy?" I was stunned. I took her hand, gently removed the ring, and, without saying a word, I walked away. For over a month she tried to contact me, calling multiple times a day, but I refused to engage. She even tried to catch me at home, at work, and at school, but I avoided her at every turn. She reached out to my parents to get them involved, but after I explained what happened, they respected my decision to cut ties. One day, she found me sitting in a booth at a local pizza place. She slid in next to me, blocking my way out, determined to talk. I couldn't bear it anymore, so I calmly stood up, stepped out of the booth, and walked away, leaving her sitting there. Eventually, she gave up trying to reconnect. I still saw her around campus occasionally, and though she would smile at me, I simply nodded and moved on. When I arrived at the cafeteria, Miss Stewart wasn't there yet, but she showed up just as I was sitting down. She joined me, and as soon as she did, she asked, "So, tell me more about what you found interesting when you were looking at me." "Why? You were clearly upset when I did." She sighed. I guess I owe you an apology for how I reacted. I went through a tough breakup recently, and since then I've been wary of men. It feels like most of them only see me as someone to look at, not as a person. When I caught you looking at me, I thought, great, another guy who only sees me on the surface. If that's how you felt, why did you keep engaging with me after I snapped back? Because you stood your ground. I'm used to people backing off when I challenged them, but you didn't. You matched my energy, and that really intrigued me. You might change your mind about me and think I'm not the best person, but I've been watching you, wondering what it would be like to get closer. I doubt it. If you were that type, you would have acted differently when you had the chance. The fact that you didn't, even though you could have, made me even more curious. I looked at her for a moment and asked, You were interested, weren't you? She briefly looked away, but then met my gaze again and deigned in that moment, yes, I didn't plan it, and I wasn't thinking about it initially, but the way you handled things caught me off guard. If you had walked out when you had the chance, we wouldn't be having this conversation, but you stayed, and the way you looked at me made me wonder if there was more to explore. Since then, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. There's something about you that intrigues me, and I need to find out what it is. After guessing you might not follow, I decided to take the initiative. That's why I ended up sitting with you after school. Do you really think there's something between us? I noticed the way you looked at me on the first day of class. I'm confident and assertive, and I need someone who can handle that without backing down. You've shown you're not easily intimidated. You're definitely right about that, but as for the rest, I'm not so sure. I noticed you on the first day, but I usually go for someone with a different demeanor. I can be different. The assertiveness you see is how I've had to handle people in general. I've dealt with some tough situations, making me cautious around others. When I saw you looking at me, I reacted defensively, but I didn't realize you were different from the others. I listened, feeling a mix of uncertainty and curiosity. It was unusual, but I've always trusted my instincts. Her openness made me think maybe this was worth exploring, even if I wasn't entirely sure. Like I said, she continued, since that moment I've been thinking about getting to know you better and seeing where this could lead. I can be completely honest about that. Maybe we can meet up tomorrow and see what happens, I suggested. It can't be today because I have plans, but tomorrow is my day off and I'm free in the afternoon. I don't have class tomorrow, she said, giving me her address. I told her I'd be there by mid-afternoon, and we went back to class. Before meeting her, I had never been with someone so forward. Our interactions continued for a few months, and I'm not sure how long things would have lasted if I hadn't discovered something unexpected. One day, I finished work early and decided to surprise her, but when I arrived at her place, I saw her getting into a car with someone else. They were clearly close. I waited until they noticed me. When they finally did, she looked over, recognized me, and waved before driving away. As I drove home, I reflected on the uneasy feeling I'd had before, and regretted not paying closer attention to it sooner. There was still a month left in the semester, and since seating was assigned, Pam was stuck sitting next to me for the remainder of the term. It promised to be awkward, to say the least. I made sure to claim my seat before Pam arrived, and when she finally walked in, I looked up briefly to acknowledge her presence. If she had anything to say, she never got the chance, as Professor Smythe called the class to order immediately. I avoided eye contact with Pam throughout the class, and as soon as it ended, I quickly packed up and headed to Carlisle Hall. I missed lunch at the cafeteria, so the next time Pam would see me in class would be Monday morning, unless she made an effort to reach out over the weekend. She didn't call me, and of course, I didn't call her. On Monday, I was running late, and Pam was already seated when I arrived. I lingered in the hallway until Professor Smythe came in, then slipped into the classroom and took my seat just as he began the lecture. I ignored Pam once again, and as soon as class ended, she hurried off to her next class. I figured that my avoidance of Pam, since I'd seen her with that guy, would be enough to make it clear that I wanted nothing more to do with her. After giving it some thought, I decided to stick with my decision and headed to the cafeteria for lunch. Just as I was about to sit down, Pam appeared and took the seat across from me. She didn't waste any time. "Why didn't you call?" she asked. "I didn't want to cause problems with you and your new man." He's not my new man. Okay. I didn't want to cause trouble with your new buddy. He's not that either. It doesn't matter. The kiss you shared wasn't just a friendly peck. The way you got into his car and locked lips with him told me it wasn't the first time. No, but it didn't mean anything. He was just someone to go out with while you were working. Well, now you can date him full time. I don't want to date him full time. I just needed to get out of the house while you were working, so I went out with Chuck. It's how I stay active. Couldn't you go out with friends instead? Do you need a boyfriend? I'm sorry, Pam, but this isn't going to work for me. That kiss told me everything I needed to know. You don't kiss like that unless there's something more going on. What are you trying to say? It's simple, Pam. I've seen you with him, and I'm just not interested anymore. She stood up abruptly, causing her chair to topple over. With a fierce glare, she spat, "Fuck you, asshole!" and stormed away. We managed to get through the rest of the semester without speaking. June came and went, and we didn't see each other until the end of August, when school resumed. I worked full-time for Uncle Jim and dated a bit. I even had a brief affair with a woman whose car I serviced. She was about 10 years older than me, but it didn't matter. It ended after 5 weeks when she revealed that her husband was coming home from a business trip abroad. I hadn't even known she was married. When school started again, Pam and I found ourselves in the same classes. I made sure to sit as far from her as possible, and we didn't exchange a word. Occasionally, I'd notice her glancing in my direction, and her expression seemed to be one of deep thought. 3 weeks into the semester, I was eating lunch alone in the student union cafeteria when Pam approached and sat down next to me. I stared at her in silence until she spoke. "We need to talk, Rob." "Go ahead. I'm listening." There was nothing serious between Chuck and me. He wanted something more, but I was just looking for someone to go out with. I'll admit I used kisses and light touches to keep him interested, but it wasn't genuine, it wasn't working, and I knew it wouldn't. I understand that we might never go back to how things were, but I want to at least try to stay friends. I miss being able to talk to you as much as I do with anyone else. Can we stop avoiding each other? Can we at least stay friends? I'd never been looking for a long-term relationship with Pam, so the way we broke up didn't bother me much, but I got where she was coming from. Given that we'd be seeing each other often due to school, there was no sense in making things more complicated. I think I surprised her when I said, "I can do that." From then until the end of the semester, we spent time together. Pam joined me for lunch. We studied together in the library, and we even teamed up for a project on production management. As the semester drew to a close, Pam began making subtle attempts to rekindle our relationship. I chose to ignore them. For one, I still had a job and didn't fully trust her not to go out while I was working. While she might have been honest about Chuck, I couldn't be sure. I didn't know Chuck or his circle, and as the saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. Moreover, I had been dating Nancy Newbert for the past couple of months, and was considering her as a potential long-term partner. Nancy seemed to treat me well, and I felt the same way about her. With 2 weeks left before the spring semester, the last one before graduation, I spent my time with Nancy and working for Uncle Jim. When the spring semester began, Pam and I found ourselves in the same situation against Segi, with 3 of our classes together. We resumed the familiar dynamic we had from the previous semester. As the semester progressed, Pam continued to drop hints that she wanted to resume our relationship. I kept ignoring them, which seemed to annoy her, though she tried to hide it. 2 weeks before graduation, Pam made a direct approach. "I'm horny as hell, Rob. Help me out. We've always been good together, and I know you can fix my problem." It's a tempting offer, Pam, but I don't think my future wife would approve. Your future wife? Nancy didn't attend college, and as far as I knew, Pam was unaware of her existence. I had proposed to Nancy, and she had accepted. We planned to marry the week after graduation. My future wife will be here in 3 weeks. I'm sure she won't appreciate me getting involved with you so close to the wedding. When I said that, I saw a flash of something in Pam's eyes, something dark and unlike her usual demeanor. I graduated and continued working for Uncle Jim while I searched for a job that would utilize my degree. "Why are you looking for another job?" my uncle asked. "I always assumed you'd stay with me. I plan to open a new store on the other end of town and put you in charge of it." After discussing it, I decided to stay with him. Nancy and I had a civil ceremony, attended by my parents and uncles. Nancy was an only child, and both her parents had passed away. Her relatives lived on the other side of the country, and she hadn't been in touch with them for years. The next 4 years flew by in a blur of happiness. Work was going well, and our marriage was thriving. With our combined incomes, Nancy and I managed to buy a 3-bedroom ranch-style house in a nice neighborhood. We also purchased a 2-bedroom apartment, planning to start a family in 4 or 5 years once our financial situation was a bit more stable. We wanted to enjoy our time together before taking on the responsibility of parenthood. Every Wednesday night since we met, Nancy would stay late at work for drinks with her colleagues. A few months after the wedding, I decided to find something to do instead of just watching TV while waiting for her to come home. One of the mechanics at my shop asked if I bowled. When I said yes, he mentioned that a spot had opened on his team due to an accident. They played in a men's league on Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock and needed a replacement. I agreed to join. I met the guys on the team and we got along well. So, each Wednesday night, while Nancy enjoyed her evening out with her friends, I would bowl. Afterward, I usually stayed with the team for a couple of beers before heading home, arriving about an hour before Nancy. Most of the time, I was already in bed by the time she got home. I went to bed early to wake up in time for the gym when it opened at 5 o'clock. One Wednesday night, a week after our 5th anniversary, none of the guys could stay out after bowling, and I didn't want to drink alone. Not knowing the other teams well enough to join them, I decided to surprise Nancy and her friends with a visit. The Alhambra Lounge, where Nancy and her friends usually hung out, was only a 10-minute walk from the bowling alley, though it was in the opposite direction from home. I thought, why not? It's probably a one-time thing. The lounge was quite spacious, divided into sections. The bar was on one side, and there were booths along a chest-high partition on the other. Beyond the partition, a large dance floor, and more tables and booths could be found. The dance floor was brightly lit, but the bar area was dimly lit. Consequently, it was hard to see what was happening at the bar from the dance floor unless you had keen eyes and knew what to look for. On the other hand, if you were at the bar facing the dance floor, you had a clear view of everything except what was going on in the booths along the chest-high partition. The entrance led directly to the bar, and you had to walk halfway along the bar to reach the entrance to the dance floor. I walked through the front door and glanced to my left, toward the dance floor. I spotted Nancy, but she wasn't with her usual group. Instead, she was sitting in a booth with another woman, Pam Stewart. I don't know why I decided to take a seat at the bar, but I did, choosing a spot where I could keep an eye on Nancy and Pam. I couldn't believe that Pam didn't know Nancy was my wife. Knowing Pam, it was clear she'd probably told Nancy about our past. Yet, Nancy had never mentioned Pam to me. As I sipped my Coors and watched them, I noticed that Pam was laughing and smiling a lot, while Nancy had a sour expression, clearly uninterested in the conversation. I had met many of Nancy's coworkers at picnics and Christmas parties, but none of them seemed to be present that night. About 5 minutes after I arrived, a man joined Nancy and Pam. He sat next to Pam, chatting with her, while Nancy stared disinterestedly at the table. A few minutes later, the man stood up, and Nancy followed him as they walked out through the side door leading to the parking lot. My curiosity was piqued. I asked the barmaid to watch my drink while I went to the car to get something. "Why?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Will it do anything?" I just grinned and walked out the front door. I circled the building until I found a dark spot where I could watch the parking lot unnoticed. It took a minute, but soon I saw the man sitting in an old Dodge Ram, leaning back and looking up at the dashboard. But Nancy was nowhere in sight. I figured she must have gone back inside while I was making my way around. I scanned the lot again, and just as I was about to head back inside, I saw the man in the Ram make a sudden movement. A moment later, Nancy jumped out of the car. The sight initially surprised me, but it didn't take long to piece together what was happening. I had taken a few steps toward the lot before I stopped myself. I needed to find out how long this had been going on, and if the guy in the Ram was the only one. I needed to know more before reacting impulsively. I hurried back inside and resumed my seat at the bar. The barmaid reassured me that my beer had been closely watched and remained untouched. I gave her a smile and a nod, but even as I raised the beer to my lips, my gaze was fixed on the side door. It opened, and Nancy walked in alone. She wasn't smiling, and looked nothing like someone who had just enjoyed herself. She walked over to the booth where Pam was sitting, said something that looked far from friendly, grabbed her purse, and then exchanged a few more words before leaving. As she made her way toward the bar, I turned so that if she glanced in my direction, all she would see was a man hunched over his drink. I finished my beer, left a tip for the bartender, and headed home. About 6 blocks from the lounge, I spotted Nancy's car at a Conoco station. She was rummaging through the trunk and emerged with a small suitcase. I thought about it for a moment, then realized she was probably using the restroom at the gas station to freshen up before coming home. If I hadn't been asleep when she arrived, she wouldn't have greeted me with a kiss that still smelled of someone else. Would she? I pretended to be asleep when Nancy came in. She climbed under the covers, snuggled up to me, kissed my shoulder, and whispered, "I love you." Within seconds, her breathing steadied, and she was asleep. Loved me. Then why was she cheating? Thursday morning, I told Mike I would miss bowling the following Wednesday, due to personal matters I needed to handle. The rest of the day was spent wrestling with my thoughts on what to do next. Maintaining a normal facade was tough, but I managed. I had no trouble making love to Nancy on Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, and Tuesday, playing the role of a loving husband. And indeed, I loved her deeply, having fallen for her the day we met. But now, with the knowledge of her infidelities, I doubted if love alone was enough to keep us together. On Wednesday, I parked where I could see Nancy's car at her workplace. When she left at 5:30, I followed her. She drove to the Alhambra Lounge, and I continued around the block to avoid being spotted. I parked a block away and walked to the gym, concealing my car to avoid detection. Disguised in a baseball cap, horn-rimmed glasses with the lenses removed, and an old jacket from Goodwill, I hoped Nancy wouldn't recognize me. I entered the lounge and noticed Nancy sitting alone in a booth on the side of the dance floor. I took a seat at the bar, and the barmaid approached. "Like last time?" she asked. Surprised she remembered, I nodded, and she brought me a cold Coors. As I took a sip, she pointed to Nancy and asked, "Your wife?" "What?" "Your wife," she said. "How did you know?" "It's not that hard. You kept watching her when you were here last Wednesday, left and came back around the same time she did. You started looking for her as soon as you came in, and now you're watching her again in Nason. She's either your wife, fiancé, or close friend." "Close?" "Right on." "I see a lot in this place," she said, "and I pride myself on being sharp, but I haven't figured her out yet." "What do you mean?" "She used to come here with a group of girls, but now they've all stopped coming. It's just your wife and one other woman." "Your wife sits alone, drinks, and waits for the other woman to arrive. She doesn't dance with anyone who asks, just sits and drinks until the other woman shows up. About half an hour later, a man joins them, and they sit and chat for a bit before your wife and the man leave together. Afterward, your wife returns, grabs her purse, and leaves. I haven't figured out what's happening, and my curiosity is driving me nuts. If you find out, let me know, okay?" "I'll definitely find out. Maybe not today, but I will. Keep me posted." "I will." I had 2 beers while keeping an eye on Nancy. The barmaid was right. Nancy turned down 9 different guys who approached her booth, presumably to dance. I watched the front door through the mirror behind the bar, checking every time the door opened. Almost an hour into my watch, the front door opened, and I saw Pam and a man enter through the mirror. I lowered my head and hunched my shoulders, trying to avoid being seen, but Pam didn't glance my way. The man with her sat at the bar while Pam joined Nancy in the booth. Nancy's face remained expressionless, and there was no visible exchange of greetings between them. Pam ordered a drink, and the 2 women started talking. More accurately, Pam did the talking, while Nancy listened. Pam pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and the phone at the end of the bar rang. The man with Pam answered his phone, said something, and then joined Pam and Nancy at the booth. Predicting what might happen next, I decided to step outside. I walked around the building and positioned myself where I could see the side door without being seen. About 5 minutes later, the side door opened, and out came Nancy with the man. They headed to the van and climbed into the back. Hoping not to be noticed, but not particularly concerned, I moved closer to the van. I pressed my ear to the back door and overheard Nancy say, "I don't care what that bitch told you." Maybe. "Fuck you. I'm leaving." "Not so fast. Let me go." A cry of pain followed, and then Nancy said, "You'll pay for this." "Maybe, but not tonight," came the response, followed by the sound of the side door opening. I quickly moved to the driver's side of the van and, peeking out, saw Nancy heading back to the bar. I ducked down and, keeping the cars between us, ran toward the front door. I sat down at the bar just as Nancy approached the counter, picked up her purse, and took a sip of her drink. She then threw the rest of the drink in Pam's face, said something, and headed for the exit. I hunched my shoulders and lowered my face into my beer as Nancy walked out, not noticing me. But the drama didn't end there. Nancy had either forgotten or overlooked the fact that she had to walk past the van to get to her car. The man she'd left with was leaning against the van, holding his groin. When he saw Nancy, he yelled, "You bitch! I'm going to hurt you for kicking me in the balls!" Nancy didn't say a word. She just kept walking toward her car. The guy made a move to grab her, but Nancy pulled something from her purse and threw it in his face. He screamed, clutching his eyes, while Nancy continued walking. The guy dropped to his knees, sobbing as Nancy's car's headlights illuminated him from the parking lot. I was still uncertain about what would happen between Nancy and me, but for now, she was still my wife. It was my responsibility to protect her, even if it meant resorting to less than sporting measures. I walked up to the guy, kicked him hard in the ribs, and then stomped on him. When I was finished, I said, "Leave Nancy alone. If you don't, next time I'll put you in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. If you need to take out your anger, take it out on the bitch who threw this little party." I kicked him once more for good measure and then headed home. On the drive back, I decided I had gathered enough information to confront Nancy. The rest, I would have to learn from her directly. When I got home, Nancy was already there and awake. She came over to hug and kiss me, but I pushed her away. Her surprised expression only fueled my resolve. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Why would I kiss you after what you've been up to?" I didn't expect a denial, but Nancy's face fell, looking as if all of the air had been let out of her. She sat down and said, "You weren't supposed to know. I tried so hard to keep it from you. I'm so sorry. I'll pack my things and leave tomorrow." She then got up and headed toward the bedroom. After a moment, I followed her. When I reached the bedroom, I found her sitting on the bed, crying hard. Though I wanted to comfort her, I resisted the urge, sat down on my side of the bed with my back against the headboard, and watched her. Eventually, her sobbing subsided, and I asked, "Can you tell me why this happened?" She looked at me with a sorrowful expression, and then she began to explain. She told me about one of my rare trips out of town, during which she had gone out with her friends for their usual girls' night out. What started as a routine evening of drinking, talking, and harmless dancing with familiar faces had taken a turn when she began to feel dizzy and disoriented. Pam had suggested they step outside for some fresh air. "I had no idea she even knew about you. It turns out she held a grudge and planned to use me to get back at you. I begged her not to send you the video, but she just laughed and said she wanted to see your reaction. No matter how much I pleaded, she wouldn't listen. And you might notice something different when I get home. Even if I do my best to clean up, there might still be signs that could make you suspicious. I could brush my teeth and use mouthwash, but it wouldn't be foolproof." "How did Pam get involved? She transferred from another branch and must have seen your picture on my desk. She joined our group for outings and bided her time. As Nancy explained everything, I couldn't help but wonder if I had done something to provoke Pam. I remembered what Billy Newbert had said about her being manipulative. Once Nancy was done, she sat on the bed, looking anxious. I wasn't sure if she expected me to be angry, but I stayed silent for a moment before asking, "Why didn't you just tell me what was going on? Why didn't you trust me and our relationship? I wouldn't have blamed you for being deceived." "I couldn't risk that. I love you deeply, and losing you would be unbearable. But if you had seen that video, I might have lost you months ago. I knew you would have gone after Pam, and she would have relished watching it all unfold." "The video itself wasn't the issue. Knowing how Pam manipulated you, I doubt I would have even looked at it. I couldn't take that chance. It wasn't just about me and one other person. You're missing the point, Nancy. I know you were influenced by something beyond your control." "That's exactly it, Bobby. I didn't tell you everything. By the time I was fully aware, I was already deeply entangled. If you had seen the video, you would have seen me in a compromised state, clearly affected by the situation. I was in a tough spot, and my actions were heavily influenced. I couldn't risk telling you and causing even more pain." I sat there, stunned, absorbing the weight of what she had done. This led to even more questions. If you enjoyed it so much, how many more times did you do it? "That was the only time. Looking back, I think I let myself relax because it felt like it didn't matter. It had already happened while I was under the influence, and I really enjoyed it once the effect wore off. By then, the decision had been made, and since I liked it, why not continue? You were out of town, so I didn't feel the need to rush home. Again, if you liked it so much, why didn't you do it again? Why stop with just the head?" "I didn't do it again because I knew it would lead me down a path I didn't want to go. The second time would lead to the third, and so on. I could hide it for a while, but eventually you'd find out and I'd lose you. Losing you was a price I wasn't willing to pay. Even though I agreed to do them again the following Wednesday, I didn't. I only did it reluctantly to keep Pam from sending you the tape. I thought if I stuck to the usual girly stuff, you'd never know what was happening. How did you find out?" I told her how I discovered the truth and added, "I didn't notice any other girls in the 2 nights I watched you. Gail got married and her new husband's work schedule kept her from coming by. Marge's husband got a new job and his schedule prevented her from coming too. Jill stopped practicing because she was a good friend of Gail's, and when Gail stopped, Jill dropped 2 classes. In a way, it's probably a good thing the group broke up, because I would never have been able to hide what I was doing from them. How could I? Leaving the bar with a man to go to the parking lot, they would have guessed right away. Gail and Jill are so straightforward they might have called you to tell you what I was up to. I'm sorry, Bobby. I'm really sorry for what I did to us." She stood up and said, "I'll sleep on the couch tonight and call in sick tomorrow. I'll pack my things and try to be gone by the time you get home." "No, you won't. Yes, you'll sleep on the couch, but tomorrow you'll go to work and act normally around Pam, or at least as normally as you can after what happened. It's something for me to think about, but Miss Stewart will soon realize she picked the wrong man." Nancy started to respond, but I raised my hand to stop her. "Not now. Just leave me alone. I need time to think." Nancy gave me a long, regretful look, picked up a pillow, and left the room. Sleep eluded me that night, and when it did come, it was fitful. I woke up several times before the alarm rang at 6. I doubted Nancy slept any better on the couch. The other 2 bedrooms were not suitable for an adult. One was a home office, and the other was set up for a baby, with only a crib. When I walked into the kitchen after my morning shower, Nancy was already making breakfast. She placed a plate on the table for me and then left the room without a word. As I ate, I could hear the shower running and wondered how our day would unfold. Nancy hadn't returned by the time I finished breakfast, so I grabbed my travel mug and filled it with coffee before heading to work. As I drove, I considered various actions I might take against Pam, but most of them were so extreme they could have landed me in prison if I hadn't managed to get away with them, so I set those ideas aside. Being the boss had its perks today, as I didn't accomplish much work. Instead, I spent most of the day mulling over the situation and strategizing my next move. By mid-afternoon, it became clear that the complex plans I'd been considering wouldn't work. They relied on too many variables and precise timing. If even one element failed to align, the whole plan would unravel, and I didn't want Pam to see it coming. I remembered my professor's advice on planning and project management, The KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. With that in mind, I simplified my approach and came up with a straightforward plan. It was workable if I could get the right help, and I knew exactly who to approach. I first met Ramon 2 days after my 18th birthday. It was the summer between high school graduation and college. I was working construction for my Uncle George, cleaning up the site, when I heard sirens approaching. A tall Hispanic man was running desperately, and I guessed his flight was connected to the sirens. As he drew closer, I shouted for him to hide in a construction trailer on the edge of the site. He didn't hesitate, diving into the trailer just as a police car arrived. The officer asked if I had seen anyone running that way. A guy in jeans and a camouflage jacket ran by a few minutes ago. I think he went around the corner and headed up Wilcox. The officer jumped back into the car, lights flashing and sirens blaring, and sped off toward Wilcox. Why did I help the guy? At the time, I was fed up with the police after getting 2 bogus traffic tickets in the past month. One for not stopping at a stop sign, and another for speeding 3 miles over the limit. I wasn't exactly on friendly terms with the cops, and helping the runner was my way of giving them the finger. Once the police were out of sight, I entered the trailer and found Ramon Aguilera. I told him the coast was clear, but advised him to stay put in case the cops returned. I didn't ask why they were after him, and he kept his reasons to himself. I returned to cleaning up the lot, and after the police didn't come back for half an hour, I went back to the trailer. I gave Ramon a pair of coveralls and swapped my Levi jacket for his camo jacket, agreeing to switch back in a day or so. Ramon was extremely grateful and promised that if I ever needed anything, he'd be there for me. 2 days later, we exchanged jackets, and Ramon took me to a party where he introduced me to Carmen, who ended up taking my virginity that night. As far as I was concerned, any debt Ramon felt he owed me was paid in full. But he didn't see it that way, and I wasn't going to argue. I spent the rest of the summer with Ramon, who always had a rotation of women. Carmen, Maria Consuela, and Lupe made sure I was well versed in these matters. I later found out that one of Ramon's ventures was running a network of girls, and he set me up with them. Complaining wasn't an option. Ramon and I kept in touch, and if anyone could help me now, it was him. Over the years, Ramon had thrived. While many of his ventures were shady or outright illegal, he also ran a few legitimate businesses, including a Mexican restaurant and bar called El Mason. I called Ramon and asked him to meet me for a drink after work. After the usual pleasantries, I laid out my problem and my proposed solution, asking for his input. He offered several suggestions, which I listened to carefully. We worked out a plan together, and I returned home, uncertain of what awaited me. Whatever it was, I'd need to be more diplomatic with Nancy, since her assistance would be crucial for the plan involving Pam. When I got home, I found Nancy sitting at the kitchen table with an open bottle of wine in front of her and a half-full glass in her hand. She looked up as I walked in and said, "I wasn't sure when you'd be home or if you'd be home at all, so I didn't make dinner. If you're hungry, there are leftovers I can heat up in the microwave." "What do we have?" She listed the options, I picked one, and she got up to prepare it. I watched her for a moment before asking, "How was your day with Pam?" When she came in, she handed me a receipt for the clothes. She said she'd drop them off at the dry cleaner on my way to work, and that I could pick them up on Monday. I've got a plan to get back at her for what she did, but I'll need your help. You've got it. Don't you want to know what I'm planning before you agree? No, I don't care what it is, as long as it makes her suffer. I don't even care if it's illegal. Just make sure she gets hurt. She set the plates on the table, and as we began to eat, she said, "I need to figure out whether I should stay here or move out. If I stay, we'll need to buy a bed for the baby's room. I can't keep sleeping on this couch. You can return to our bedroom. Just stick to your side of the bed." Looks like I really need to start looking for a new place. It might come to that. Right now, I'm still processing everything. I'm deeply hurt and bitter that you didn't trust me enough to tell me what happened when it first occurred. It makes me question how you view me and my love for you. It feels like you doubt my love, and that doubt makes me wonder where I went wrong. I thought I showed you my love completely and unconditionally, but apparently that wasn't enough. And then there's the fact that you admit you enjoyed every moment of what you did. Even after the influence wore off, you continued with it all afternoon and evening. Nancy listened quietly while I spoke. When I finished, she said, "You're completely wrong. I know how much you love me, and I cherish that. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd find out about the tape. I know you, Rob. I know exactly what you'd do if you knew. You'd confront Pam, and she'd either laugh at you and give you the tape, or you'd find a way to take it from her. Once you had the tape, there's no doubt you'd watch it. Your curiosity would drive you to explore and satisfy that need to know. I made sure you would never see that tape or even know about its existence. I'm convinced that if the tape weren't an issue, I could have confessed, and you would have comforted me, helped me through it, and continued to love me. But the fact is, the tape is there, and it made all the difference. Would your feelings for me still be the same after watching that tape? I truly believed that seeing the tape would change everything. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. I just couldn't risk it. Nancy got up, collected the empty plates, and started loading the dishwasher while I sat at the table, reflecting on her words. She was right on 2 counts. First, my curiosity would have driven me to watch the tape. Second, my reaction was already spinning out of control with thoughts about divorce, even though I hadn't seen the tape yet. I needed to push those thoughts aside until I had a clearer plan for dealing with Pam. After Nancy finished with the dishes, I told her to grab a drink and sit down. She poured herself a glass of Merlot while I grabbed a PBR from the refrigerator. Once we were back at the table, I outlined the plan Ramon and I had devised. Nancy listened intently, and for the first time since our confrontation, she smiled. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in a while. The key to making this work is to get her alone. Do you have any ideas on how we can manage that? I asked. Nancy had several ideas, and we discussed them, identifying flaws in almost every suggestion. However, she came up with one plan that could work, provided Pam acted as we hoped. We decided to give it a shot, and if it didn't pan out, we'd come up with a plan B. That night, as we settled into our double bed, there was a noticeable distance between us. Yet, when I woke up the next morning, Nancy was pressed against me. I didn't push her away, nor did he the following nights when the same thing happened. On Wednesday, we put our plan into action. I was in the parking lot of the Alhambra when Nancy arrived. She parked and went inside, and I climbed into her vehicle, crouching behind the seat with my head down. We were testing the plan, and keeping my head down ensured I wouldn't be seen from the passenger side. We waited. Nancy needed to get Pam to the car. If she succeeded, the plan would work. If not, we'd have to figure out plan B, which we hadn't developed yet. As I waited, I racked my brain for ways to make Pam experience what she had done to Nancy, but I came up empty-handed, unable to justify her actions. My cell phone rang, so I turned it off. We had agreed that Nancy would hit speed dial on my phone if she managed to get Pam to the car. Moments later, I heard voices approaching and braced myself. I had rehearsed this scenario countless times and was confident it would work. The doors opened, and when the passenger door closed, I overheard, "Okay, what's so damn important that we need to discuss in the privacy of your car?" I don't need privacy. I just didn't want to make a scene at the bar. I had no idea how you'd react when I told you I confessed everything to Rob. He's going to come after you, and I wanted to warn you in case you wanted to leave town. I don't care what happens to you, but I don't want to see Rob in jail for what he might do to you. Funny thing is, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't come up with a single reason why you did what you did. He left me. When a relationship ends, I'm the one who ends it, not the guy. Rob left me for no reason, and he has to pay. That was an unexpected twist. I hadn't anticipated getting an answer to the question that had been nagging at me since the night I confronted Nancy. Pam's justifications for her actions were so absurd that I almost laughed, but I kept my composure. Instead, I silently restrained Pam at gunpoint until she lost consciousness from lack of oxygen. Nancy started the car, and we drove a couple of blocks before pulling into an alley behind the Safeway store. Ramon and 2 other men were waiting in a van. They quickly transferred Pam from Nancy's car to their van, and then Nancy drove me back to my car. I retrieved Pam's purse from where she had dropped it and took the keys from it before heading to Pam's vehicle. I handed the car key to one of Ramon's men who was waiting in the alley, and he drove off after confirming there were no videotapes in the car. Nancy then picked me up and drove me home. At home, Nancy asked if I had found the tape, and I confirmed that I had. I looked at it long enough to confirm it was your tape, and then I destroyed it. So, you've seen everything I did? No, I didn't. I watched maybe a minute of the tape before turning it off. For our sake. I'd prefer to never see it again. Do we have a chance of surviving this? Does that mean there's still hope? There's a chance. Yes. A guarantee? No. I have a lot to catch up on, and whether I can do that remains to be seen. Only time will tell. We did manage to survive, and ironically it was because of the tape that Nancy thought would ruin us. I wasn't entirely truthful when I said I destroyed it. Nancy was right about my curiosity. I did end up watching it. To my surprise, it didn't make me cringe or drive me to kick Nancy out. I am concerned that she might repeat her actions, but Nancy knows I'm vigilant and will notice if it happens again. She claims she loves me and doesn't want to lose me, and I believe her. She's aware that she cannot afford to make the same mistake again. As for Pam, that's where things got strange. The plan was for Ramon to involve Pam with his associates, so his Hispanic clients could enjoy the blonde Anglo girl and eventually send her to a brothel in Mexico, but that didn't happen. When Nancy arrived at work on Thursday, Pam was absent. No one discussed her absence until lunchtime, when Mary Ellen asked if Pam was sick. Nancy said Pam had seemed fine when they last met. Pam was again absent on Friday, with the excuse being illness. Then, on Monday, Pam surprised everyone by showing up for work. During the morning coffee break, she handed Nancy an envelope. "That's every penny I got for pandering to you, plus 100% interest," Pam said before walking away, leaving Nancy stunned. That evening, Nancy came home just in time to see Pam getting into a car driven by Ramon. Pam slid into the seat, and she and Ramon shared a long, passionate kiss before he drove away. I haven't been able to reach Ramon to find out what's really going on, but I suspect there's a lot more to the story.